Hey everyone, my name is James McCool. I'm the owner of Paydirt DFS.com, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a breakdown on the newer contest sims logic. We have had contest sims on the site for a while now, since kind of later last year, and we utilized it a lot for NFL and for showdown simulations. But there were some issues with it that I'm going to talk through on why I reassessed the logic on it and kind of where it's at now and where it's going to be moving forward. So I will get into that here in a second, but I just wanted to kind of preface with that about what this video is going to be about. So before we get into that, while it takes a second to load things up, the first thing that you're going to want to do every single time that you load this up, and you can find this under sports models, MLB contest sims. The first thing you're going to want to do, if it doesn't preload, is hit this load reset data button. So what this is going to do is it's going to go and re-download new seed frames for both DraftKings and FanDuel, and then reestablish some connections as well. So that probably leads into the question, James, what is a seed frame? A seed frame is a pre-created, randomly generated set of lineups that are highly plausible to be part of and represent a field in a contest. That's a lot of words to basically say that I developed an algorithm that is aiming to create highly plausible lineups on a back end so that we can then load that back end in and simulate over different subsets of them. If that doesn't make a lot of sense, that's okay. You don't really need to know those things. If you want to ask me more questions about that stuff, you certainly can in the Discord, and I'm happy to answer them. But regardless, so the first thing you're going to want to do, if it doesn't go through that process of saying like init DK seed frame and FD seed frame, and then it does init baselines, then you're going to want to hit this load reset button. You can do this once every 10 minutes, and it'll load in fresh data. You just want to make sure that you have the most recent data available. So then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit, you're going to want to choose. Currently, the only thing available is main slate. Other main slate doesn't do anything right now. There's going to be a secondary slate here added as soon as I can get some optimizations to speed done for the main slate. But then you're going to want to choose DraftKings or FanDuel, and then you're going to choose what size you're simulating. We'll leave it on small for now, but you can choose small, medium, large, or you can even put in a custom field size anywhere from 10 to, 5,000 or 10 to like 10,000 people. And then you're going to choose how sharp the field is. So if it's a bunch of people who are really good at DFS, it's a very sharp field. If it's a bunch of people who are not good at DFS, it's not very sharp field. Just for the purposes of this, we're going to keep it on small and vary, but to give some understandings about what these things do, if you choose small is simulating a 500-person field. And that is going to do a couple things for you in terms of like how much of the seed frame it's pulling, because the seed frame in total is about 500,000 lineups. So if you're only pulling 500 of those, you're going to be looking at a smaller subset of the entirety of what the seed frames have created. How sharp the field is going to be telling the algorithm to look toward the top of the seed frames or to widen it out. So vary is only including like the top 10% of the most plausible lineups of the seed frame, whereas not vary can include the entirety of the seed frame. You can pull randomly 500 lineups from across the entire seed frame, and it's not just going to be the best lineups. Some of the best lineups are available, but that doesn't mean that you're going to find the most plausible lineups overall. So I want to hammer home the idea that what we are looking at here is not necessarily the lineups that are created to perform the best, but the lineups that are to be representative of plausibility within the field. And that's an important concept, which I'm going to talk through while it is simming out. So after you've chosen those things, we can go ahead and we can hit run contest sim. It's going to go through, it's going to say sim contest, and this is just simulating the contest. So you'll notice that ran very fast. If you've been with Paydirt for a while now and saw the contest sims of last year, then you'll know that this ran very, very quickly. And that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to create this. So last year, the seed frames were being created after you clicked the button. So it was on the client side, it was going through the issue of actually using the algorithm that I created to create the set of lineups that you wanted in the contest frame and then utilize them, right? So it had to go through that process of creating the seed frame. Now I'm creating the seed frame on the back end, and all it's doing is loading it from a database. So it's much faster. All it's having to do is just choose the lineups that it's simulating and then simulates them. And then what it's going to come up with are a couple things. So you'll have this frame here, which is the winners frame, as it is called. So this is every single lineup that ended up winning the simulation at least once. And then it'll tell you how often the lineup won the simulation as well. You can do a couple things here. I always sort this by projection when I am looking to find lineups that I want to use. It's going to tell you a couple things that are pretty important, like, Milwaukee is the team that ended up winning. You have a couple Minnesotas. There's a St. Louis. 4-man stacks. You have a bunch of Seattle and St. Louis 1-man. So sorting by projection, I think, is important. Fantasy is the fantasy score that it won the GPP with. So in the simulation, this lineup scored 168.88 fantasy points. And then GPP projection is just the difference between the projection and the fantasy score that was scored. So this is kind of an aggregation between projection and fantasy. Then you're going to come down here, and then it's going to tell you a couple things that are important about the exposures of the seed frame above. So the projected ownership is the projected ownership of the player. And the exposure is the exposure of them, the percentage of times that they showed up in the winner's frame. So Pablo Lopez projected for 28% ownership. He was optimal, aka he won the contest at 90% of the time. So there's an edge of 61%. And the edge column is kind of the most important part here, is how far under projected is the player based on how often they were in the winner's frame. So if you sort this by negative, Framber Valdez, projected ownership 35%. He was only in the winner's frame 7% of the time, so he looks very overvalued by the field. Sorted by positive, Pablo Lopez looks very undervalued, even though his projected ownership is 28%. You could, in theory, say that his optimal ownership should be about 90%, based on a very small field and based on these contest sims and the plausibility of them being in winning lineups. So Pablo Lopez, very valuable. That's what this shows you. And then you can go over and you can look at the SP exposures. So this is specifically for starting pitchers and how often they were in the winner's frame, what their projected ownership. Same thing as the overall exposures. Team exposures will show you what team stacks ended up in the winner's frame. So 27% of Milwaukee stacks, 25% of St. Louis, 21% of Seattle, 14% of Minnesota. You can look at this as a reference to what teams you should include in your player pool, or at least what team should make up the majority of your player pool in your stacks. And then stack size exposures. So this is the one where a lot of people kind of get thrown off. You can see the 5-man stacks only make up 3 of the total, however many lineups there are in here. I think it's 1,000 lineups are in the seed frame. It only makes up 3 of them, right? So 0.3% of the total lineups in the winner's frame. And then people always come back and they're like, oh, well, I thought the 5-man stacks were the thing that did best in GPPs. Feasibly, yes. 5-man stacks have the highest correlation, aka the highest ceiling based on the correlative nature of MLB. If team scores a whole bunch of runs, then we expect 5-man stacks to end up winning GPPs. But that is separate from what the contest sims are trying to do. If you go and run any optimizer and run 500 lineups without any settings, you will see a pretty low amount of 5-man stacks set up within the optimals that are put out. It is the same thing here. The difference is that a regular optimizer is optimizing based on projection, and the contest seed frames are optimizing based on plausibility. So that's what we're seeing here. And you can see still, even though 5-man stacks were only 0.3% of the total field, 7.3% to 4-man stacks. If we go up here and we sort this by projection, we can still see that the 4-man stacks are still projected the best overall. We have a 5-man stack here projected really, really well. So these lineups that are still projected well, because they have a high correlation coefficient, those things matter. I just wanted to point out, because people will see this and they'll say, oh, well, that, what I thought I was supposed to 5-man stack. You should, most of the time. So that should be something that you should know about this. Is we're aiming for plausibility here, not optimality. Optimality, leave that to optimizers. So how you should use this, you should run this based on, whatever contest that you're trying to play. One note, if you choose a large or put in a large custom number, it will take longer to run because it is trying to simulate longer. And then put in how sharp the field is and then run things. And if you want to look at this as a way of saying, oh, well, in the optimizer, I want to make sure that I have a bunch of Pablo Lopez and you know, a lot less Framber Valdez, right? Framber Valdez looks like a way worse play than Pablo Lopez. That's how I use it. I look at SP exposures so I can kind of get a good idea. I look at overall exposures and I look at exposure rates so I can see, oh, Andrew Monasterio looks like the most valuable second base, third baseman here. For 2,300, he shows up in 40% of the winning frames. So he's maybe valuable. Gary Sanchez may be valuable. And then in the team exposures, this is probably the most important part because it allows you to kind of get an idea of who are the most valuable stacks that you should be building around in the contest that you are playing. So I want to just kind of close this out a little bit with concepts about contest simulations. When you are simulating a contest, you should not be aiming to look at what projects the best. You should be looking at what wins the contest the most. And that is at its core what DFS is about. And I think that a lot of people kind of lose the forest for the trees, so to say. When you are looking at projections, the projection matters a lot less than what will win you the GPP. Typically, the wisdom of crowds is going to tell you what the best plays are. Your job is to utilize that information and find a way to put together the best plays that are going to end up winning you the GPP while also building in relative value. You know, if the contest sims say you should be using the 2 highest owned starting pitchers and the highest owned stack, there's nothing wrong with putting those guys together, so long as your secondary stack then is heavy leverage and allows you to pass the field somehow. Or if the contest sims are saying that your SP1 and your SP2 are the best plays, but you know the chalk stack is maybe not the best option, you know, then you have a really easy way to build in leverage and you can just go with the top 2 owned starting pitchers. There's nothing wrong with that. Another example, if you have the SP1 and the top owned stack, the top projected owned stack are both the best options in the contest sims, but the SP2 looks like a bad play, like you can build in really easy relative value by having a secondary stack against that SP2. Like there are a lot of ways to go about it in eating a lot of what the popular plays are and utilizing the wisdom of crowds to kind of build in the foundation of what lineups you're building, and then build in relative value, utilizing and letting the projections here at Paydirt and wherever you're at kind of building that relative value for you. So that's what the balance is. And I think these contest sims are meant to give you a guideline for understanding where you should start in contests, and then optimizers and hand building and the other tools on the site like the stack finder and the the scoring percentages and stuff like that. Those things are going to tell you where you can find relative value to help you win GPPs. So this has been a little bit of a breakdown of the contest sims, why I rebuilt them. This logic is also going to be utilized for NBA and NFL and NHL next year. It is logic that is relatively easy to replicate and build up. So it will run just as fast and be just as consistent and more consistent next year in relation to how it was in 2023. So thank you guys so much for the support. As always, Paydirt appreciates you. I appreciate you. And let's just keep building cool stuff and collecting trophies. So appreciate you guys. If you guys have questions, reach out in the Discord. Otherwise, have a good one.